Tonight's panel is part of our ongoing series of a wide variety of public lectures, panels, opportunities to not only bring in amazing guests for our students, but also the public. So if you are a student, thank you for coming here tonight. I know you've got a lot of work to do. If you are not a student, thank you for coming here tonight and joining us on campus here at CCAD. In terms of what's coming up, I'm not going to go through a whole list, but I do want to just draw your attention to a couple key things that are coming up later this spring. On Friday, April 5th, we have our master's thesis exhibition for our MFA, and it's also the inaugural thesis presentations for our Masters of Design program. This is our first graduating class for the MDes. So I hope you'll come back to campus on Friday, April 5th, and not only check out the exhibition in the gallery, but also come hear the presentations from the MDes students. If you are inspired to get your Master's in Design, you can still apply to that program. We are still accepting applications for our third class in the Masters of Design program. In May, of course, that's our big month where we have all of our end of year, we say end of year. People not in academia wonder what we're talking about, but for the rest of us, May is the end of the year, and that is when we do all of our big celebrations. So on Wednesday, May 8th, we have Chroma, Best of CCAD. On Friday, May 10th, we have our big fashion show, and then followed by commencement on Saturday. For those of you not familiar with CCAD, you may not know that this is our 140th year, which is pretty incredible. So as we like to say, we don't look a day over 139, but in fact it's true, we are 140. And so many of our events throughout the remainder of this year will be not only sort of celebrating the moment, but celebrating our history and our future. So speaking of the future, tonight's panel on women in design will speak to issues of innovation, which I think is an incredibly important part of what we all do here. And the other thing that I wanted to just draw your attention to is that many of the women here on this panel tonight may not have come from a design background in the traditional sense. And to me, I think it's important to acknowledge that we are really thinking about design in a very broad sense, which I think which adds to, I think, the value of what we do in design, to recognize that design is not just an object, though that is important as well, but it's really about a much broader understanding of what that is. So we'll talk about all of that in just a moment. So you all have, when you walked in, you got, hopefully, picked up there outside the door, lovely bios of all three women. So I'm not going to read those to you because you all can read those, but I am going to ask each panelist to just start by introducing themselves and just telling you a little bit about their current position and what they do. It's not always necessarily easy to tell just by their title, so I'm going to have them tell you just a little bit about what they're doing in their current position. And we will start on this end.
Hello, my name is Carly Price. I'm the head of the Branch Innovation Labs at JPMorgan Chase, and we're responsible for bringing new technology-enabled experiences to Chase branches, looking at things that are both near term that we can implement in the next year, as well as far out into the future.
I'm Annalise Corbin. I'm Chief Goddess of the Past Foundation. Past Foundation, yeah, it's fun. We are a tribe of anthropologists, educators, innovators, engineers, artists, who all came together to create an organization and an entity that's all about teaching, learning, and the future of work. We have a 32,000 square foot innovation lab right here in Columbus that we built and opened 2 years ago. And we spend a tremendous amount of time thinking about designing and implementing in the intersections between K-12, post-secondary, and business and industry.
Hi, my name is Veronica Lina. I'm the director of the STEMI Coalition at the Henry Ford Museum of American Innovation out of Dearborn, Michigan. The actual museum, the Henry Ford Museum of American Innovation, has 80 million artifacts of just everyday inventions from past, present, and I'm part of my job right now is to actually manage the outreach, the educational outreach arm, to hopefully bring K through 12 students through the design process, problem to prototype, so that their inventions can actually be featured on the museum floor and be used in everyday life for all of us moving forward.
So we'll reverse the order here. And if you can just talk a little bit about what was your career path? What brought you to your current position that you're in now?
Okay, if I have to be really candid, I have no background in education or nonprofit until the past 8 years. My degree was in political science and journalism. My plan was to go into law school, and so those were the 2 boxes I was supposed to check. And went to law school, loved the law, but just decided that was just not what I wanted to practice. And so I spent 8 years working for a media company here locally, the Dispatch Media Group, and I got into shows and events and TV marketing, and in journalism we call that the dark side, the advertising side, and I loved it. And then I had my daughter, and everything kind of changed, and I thought, man, I really want to do something that's a little more impactful, and I wasn't sure what that looked like. And so I went and I volunteered for this program called the Ohio Invention Convention, and literally she was strapped to me. She was like, 6 months old, and all of a sudden I saw these kids that were creating ideas that if a venture capitalist was sitting next to me, they would have put down money and said, I'm gonna invest in that. And so that's what I just decided right there and then was gonna be my career path. And I had the privilege of being the executive director for the Ohio program for about 6 years, and now I work at the National Invention Convention, and I get to work with 25 other states who run similar programs. So that was my path.
Great, thank you.
So I was that kid that tried all the majors in college. I was in school for a really, really long time because I really did try everything. I didn't really know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I just knew that I didn't want to not be when I grew up, right? And so that was that sort of serial approach of try everything. Ultimately, I landed in anthropology in particular because I was so fascinated by the intersection between humanity and science, right? And so for me, the thing that was most interesting was the artifact side of it. So I'm actually an archaeologist. I study shipwrecks, so an underwater archaeologist. I see the sort of shipwreck as the absolute manifestation of humanity, this massive tool that can do so many different things. And so I studied and did that work, was a university professor for many years doing that. And somewhere along the way, really sort of came to this realization that as students were coming into my program, I was teaching in North Carolina at the university, and talking with my colleagues from around the world, we noticed a similar sort of thing that was happening as it relates to our students. And lots of folks were talking about students coming into university terribly unprepared or lack of skills. And when I stepped back and really thought about it, that's not the problem that I saw, right? You can back gap skills, right? We can teach that. That's not really what the issue was. The issue was we were seeing some foundational trends and folks not ready to learn. They were lacking design thinking, and they were really, really lacking the ability to problem solve and thinking about being really, truly willing learners. And so the past foundation, so I'm the founder, I got the short straw. Like all great things that happened at a conference, at the bar. I still have the napkin where my colleagues were like, well then let's do something about it. We created the PAST Foundation, and the acronym is Partnering Anthropology with Science and Technology. And the evolution, we're almost 20 years old now. And that process, and along the way, over 200,000 kids have gone through or been impacted by PAST Foundation programs and projects. And it's all been around getting folks to think about the world very differently.
Great, thank you.
That's so cool. That's very cool. So I started my career path, went to Pratt Institute, studied industrial design, really just aspired to be a designer who worked in New York City, and that was all I really thought about when I graduated school. So I got a job at a great agency called Smart Design. I worked on a lot of housewares and other low-tech products like OXO Big Group's kitchen tools and Reach toothbrushes and bakeware. After about 10 years doing that type of work, I went to a different firm called IDSA, and I was with them for about 9 years. And they have a legacy of industrial design, but do many different types of design and innovation. So there I was working with hospitality companies and working on healthcare projects. It was very broad. It was way beyond just products. And at that point, I really transitioned from being I would say like a more traditional designer to doing more design research and strategy and project leadership, working with clients, and in that role, you really are forced to understand the business context. So, you know, early in my career, it was about making this as beautiful as possible and manufacturable and affordable, and then it became much more about, we have this business problem and we need design to help us solve it. So we'd be given very hairy, ambiguous projects and have to navigate our way to some solution that was scalable and would provide business impact. So I think after 18 or 20-ish years of doing consulting, I really hungered to be more a part of it and have more ownership. So I left consulting and took some roles in-house. The first was at a startup called Casper. I was an early employee there where everyone had to do everything. So I went back to doing many of the things I hadn't done for years, like design drawings for a pillow or talking to manufacturers. And then we also worked closely with marketing and all of those teams to make sure that the story was being told properly and we were creating something really unique and compelling. For a while, I then worked on my own startup, but then ultimately took a full-time job again with JP Chase a little over a year ago.
Great, excellent. So this is our third Women in Design panel, and the first two were a bit more general in terms of just talking to a number of different designers and sort of what they do, and this one has a bit of a theme to it. So the title, the subtitle besides Women in Design is Innovation from the Boardroom to the Classroom. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about innovation, and specifically in your line of work, what does innovation mean to you?
So I've always thought of it as sort of new to the world products and ideas, and the role I'm in now is so different than every other job I've had because I was always either in a design agency where you were with a bunch of like-minded people and we'd have the client, we'd all work together in sort of service of the client, but in the day-to-day surroundings, you were like with your kin. Now I'm in a world where innovation means many different things depending on which group I'm talking to. The company is enormous, and many people assume or presume that innovation is technology. So because I'm head of innovation, I was actually at an event and there was an AV issue. So his mic wasn't working and someone nudged me and said, "Hey Carly, it's a technology issue." I was like, "Oh no, that's not what I do." And helping people understand that, you know, design, like you can bring design into innovation, it's a journey for us. So the company as a whole has bought into design thinking as a concept. And I'm helping everyone to understand that it's not just, we have UX design, which does a lot of the implementation work, but what we're doing in design is different than that. We're helping to identify the right experience or solution that we need to create, and that's new to a lot of people on the business side.
So in that case, just to expand on that a little, thinking about innovation as something beyond the specific tools that one might use, like a new technology, but really as a way of working that leads to new solutions. Yeah, great. How about you?
So at PAST, we get this question all the time. And so for us, we really see innovation as a mindset. You know, the work that we're doing is, we're working with community, but we're spending a lot of time working with kids, and we spend a lot of time working with teachers, both formal and informal. And so the way that we are constantly approaching it is to sort of unfetter the idea of it, I guess, because everybody, like you, everybody comes with a preconceived notion of what innovation is, right? And especially in the world of education, we love acronyms in education. Somebody needs to build an app for me that's EduSpeak, right? You know, so a teacher says rubric and the app says to me matrix. Because, you know, I spend an awful lot of time trying to figure out what we're even talking about. And so for us, we really sort of couch innovation in that space where we can step back and say, look, if we could help the world just think about the world from a very, very different set of perspectives that's culturally relevant, locally driven, you know, very, very collaborative. Imagine what we could build, we could design. You know, the journey would be so much different. And so for us, we just roll innovation, the ideas of innovation around helping folks accept outside the norm.
Accept outside the norm, I like that. That's a good way to put it. Veronica?
Okay, so when you sent me this question, I had like a gazillion different words that I could think of to describe it, and the first one that came to my word was messy, right? Is that innovation is messy. We love this buzzword. Specifically, the program that I work on is Invention Convention is intended to teach kids the skill sets or the mindset to be an innovative learner or an innovative person in the workforce. But the sheer fact of trying to change education and the way we approach education in and of itself is messy. It's hard, it's uncomfortable, it's transition, it's all these things, right? And nobody gives you the guidebook. So you're figuring out how to fly the plane while you're building it, and that's the best way I could kind of describe it. It's also really exciting and there's no rules. And so being comfortable with risk and being comfortable with the uncomfortable and being flexible, all those things were like kind of going through my head. When it comes to innovation in education, I think having, which is the space I'm in, I think having the end goal in mind is so important. And understanding that the end goal for me is hopefully just the starting goal for somebody else. And so what I mean by that is, if I was to look out to all of you and say, well, what's the engineering design cycle? You'd probably be able to spit it out to me, or if I said, well, what's the scientific method? You'd say, oh, it starts with a hypothesis. At some point, I hope that kids go, well, how do you become an innovator? Or how do you become an inventor? And they say, well, it starts with ideation, or it comes with identifying a problem. And it's innate that all of a sudden every kid is encouraged to identify problems everywhere. And then the next step, which would be, can they understand that they have it within them to solve it, right? So I think innovation is a lot of things to a lot of people. In education, I think it seems like a really big uphill battle, but I imagine that there's been lots of other people who felt the same way. And I work for a historical museum, right, which is all about innovation. And I can remember, and Henry Ford himself has all these different stories, some good, some bad. And at one point he wasn't selling cars. And so he said, well, wait a minute, I need to give people a day off to buy my cars. So literally the weekend was born. Out of the fact that there was a problem, and the problem was people weren't buying his cars. And so he said, well, wait, I need to give all of my laborers the day off, and all of a sudden the weekend was born. And so I just think, well, what are we stumbling across on our way to hitting our goal that might also be really impactful as well? So that's messy, that's what I would say.
Great, yeah. So just to kind of expand on this notion a little bit, so what do you think some of the end results are of innovation? How is innovation changing the workplace, the classroom? Why is it so important?
Do you start with me, or should
No. I'm going to turn back this way.
So for us, when we step back and think about why is innovation so important, I think that part of it is that we have this amazing opportunity, right? So, and one of my favorite ways to sort of talk about this is to get folks to step back and think about the opportunity that's lost, right? Rather than the opportunity that's innately gained, right? So when we spend a lot of time at PASS talking about and trying to get more girls, more women in STEM, right? Is some of the premise of this very, very conversation, right? And so when we step back and we share with folks, the fact that 47% of the planet's not actively engaged in our economy because they're not working, they're not designing, they're not learning, a whole host of things depending on where you're talking about in the world, that has limited the opportunity of girls and women, step back and think about the economic power that represents. If you just want to put it in the most basic black and white terms, the amount of dollars not being generated for the global economy, it's a massive opportunity that's been lost along the way. And so for us, when we step back and think about it, we see that as a chance to not just inspire students, but the reality of it is, I would put the kids who come through on a regular basis at the Innovation Lab up against any R&D teams in the world. And the reason I say that is because through the process and the experience that they have, we can get them to ideate, to take global problems, whether they be giant ones or how to make a better water bottle along the way, and they have no preconceived constraints, or very few of them, right? Because they haven't experienced enough life to know the physics of changing that bottle aren't possible. And because they don't realize the physics of something might not be possible, there's no limits to what they imagine is possible. And so for us, that's the crux of innovation, because it's about the opportunity to help folks really dig in and engage.
Bravo.
Yeah.
He's biased.
So just want to make sure I remember the question.
So just sort of how does innovation change the workplace or the classroom? How does it? Why is it important to focus on?
Well, I would say from my vantage point now, like it's pretty amazing that someone with my background, I can't imagine that 10, 15 years ago, an organization like mine would have hired a designer to lead innovation, because it was thought more of as like, oh, that's the scientist, the inventor, and it was thought more as like a solo genius coming up with these brilliant ideas. And I think the workplace was just less collaborative in general. Even if I think about early in my career, the way we had teams set up to do design work, we didn't really collaborate. We'd be on a team, a few designers, and then we'd all present our ideas to the client would select one, and that one would go forward. It was not that very collaborative at all. Whereas, and even my organization, the teams that have been doing innovation work were product management, the team before mine, market research and product management. And I told, in talking to my team and the leadership, that we need to be working more as a band and as a solo acts. So you can't really do innovation as the process properly as a solo act. It's not about one person being an owner. It's about having all the different mindsets come together and collaborating. And that even works across the business. Whereas sometimes the lab is looked at as, oh, they come up with all the cool stuff over there, and then it gets thrown over the wall, and that doesn't work either. So I think the definition is evolving, and more creative thinking, different mindsets, different backgrounds is all much more welcome now than it had been.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, without it, we're just standing still, right? And I feel like my short answer would be, well, there's still problems to solve, so we need innovation. And the problems of today may be different and greater or less than tomorrow. And when I read this question, I remember thinking of this young lady that came to the National Invention Convention, and she was 4 years old, or fourth grade, and I'm gonna tell a story really quick. So Rachel created Rachel's PJs, and they were pretty cute, and they were designed for kids, and they had this flap on the inside of your chest that would hold your C-line in place. So if you had cancer and you were getting chemo treatment, it would hold your C-line in place. And I thought, well, that's really cool. You know, I'm glad she created those, and you kind of went, oh, you don't want to think about kids that have cancer. But then when you asked her, well, why would you create pajamas? She called them Rachel's PJs. And I said, well, why would you create them? And she starts telling me about this problem that I didn't understand. You know, and she said, you know, there's 15,000 kids a year that get an infection when they receive chemo treatment. And every time they get an infection, they end up having to stop chemo treatment for 9 days. And it adds, on average, $54,000 to their hospital stay. I mean, she literally goes through all of this. I mean, this is a problem I didn't even know about, right? And she doesn't share at the time that this directly affected her as a kid. But I thought, I love that her mind didn't go to blame somebody else. Her mind went, we gotta fix this. So my first reaction is, the reason we need innovation is because we can. And there's problems that we can still solve, and we are equipped and we are blessed with the ability to learn the skills to be able to do that. And it's really kind of innate in who we are, and it's definitely innate in our kids. To Annalise's point, they don't have inhibitions. They don't look at it and say, you can't do that. Instead, they look at it and go, well, that's not good enough. So I think we lean into that as a society, and we embrace that. And in the workforce, the more we do that, just the better, I mean, the more problems we solve, the better our lives can become, the more people we can impact, you know, just like, why not? You know?
Yeah, that's great. So I'm going off script here for 1 second. I've been at CCAD for about 3 years now, and one of the great parts of my job is that I get to go around the country, around the world on occasion, and meet with alumni. And so one of the other parts of my job is that I'm trying to be better about social media and sharing those things. And so I, do that on Twitter and Instagram. And so one of the first times I was out visiting some alumni and they were working in some really cool design firm or something, I started this hashtag CCAD work in the coolest places. Which is, cumbersome but useful. And so I was thinking about that as you were talking, and so my question for you, that you did not get to prepare for, because it's not on the script, is how does innovation change your actual physical workplace? You kind of started talking about that a little bit, and it's really curious to me to think about what does an innovative workplace look like physically in terms of just how people work?
Yes, so the environment I inherited when I took my new job was a lot of desks. So people had moved desks into the innovation lab space, which when it had started was open for prototyping and demonstrating. And our company culture is people are in their cubes or at their desks on the phone all day, because there are many, many calls, many, many meetings. So in our innovation space right now, we have people sitting at desks with headsets on phone calls like half the time. And I told my team, like, as we build the teams, you're not going to be working by yourself on projects. It's going to be collaborative. Like, we moved in a small collaboration table in between the desks, so people would turn their back to their computer and talk to each other. And we moved the desks away from the walls, so we could pin stuff up on the walls and use the whiteboards. I got a big box of foam cores so people could put stuff up and move it around. Like, we can collaborate over here. You can move that back near your desk and type up your notes. But it's much more about face-to-face conversation and writing stuff down, like getting analog again, so that we can gather around something and agree, like, okay, this is where we want to go, much more than like answering email, doing PowerPoint, being on phone calls. So we need to set up the spaces to facilitate people, help people work that way. And if everyone's in cubes and there's not collaboration spaces, just formal boardrooms, like, we need to be able to write on the wall or pin stuff up and make a mess. Like, there's a rule at my company that you can't leave any like confidential information out overnight. You have to have a clean desk. And I told them, because we're building a new space, partially building an innovation lab inside a branch. So I was on the phone with policies and procedures. All of your stuff has to be put away every night. And I was like, that's not going to happen. It's just not. Like, we cannot be creative and work that way. So it's very opposite of traditional corporate settings.
That's great. Anyone else have any?
Yeah, actually, so when I was working in Ohio on the Invention Convention program, I got a call from a gentleman in Connecticut, and they ran an Invention Convention program. And I was not buying what this guy was selling, but he said, hey, we're all going to get together and we're going to talk about having a national invention convention. And my first thought, and this is awful now, I realize it's not very innovative of me, but was like, why would Connecticut lead, the National Invention Convention? Like, they're this big, like, we're Ohio, we're like a big deal. And that was kind of arrogant of me, to be honest. So I joined this call, and there's 14 other state programs. And none of us know each other. And to be honest with you, most of them had a Ph.D. in education, and I'm super intimidated, but I thought, well, let's see where this takes us. And this was in August. And the very first National Invention Convention took place the following May, and it was messy, okay? We come to the USPTO office, the US Patent and Trademark Office in Alexandria, Virginia, and there was 192 kids, and there was 14 states that were represented. And for the first time, it wasn't just athletes that I had seen be celebrated, or traditional science fair kids, but these kids had their ideas being celebrated right across from the National Inventors Hall of Fame. And I thought, okay, because I really wasn't sure we wanted to go. We don't know that we have money for this, and we're a nonprofit, and this is out of our comfort zone. You fast forward that, and about 3.5 years later, the Henry Ford, which I always viewed as a historical museum, says, well, your mission and our mission align. They're over 100 years old, and I'm just going to be very honest, they move very methodically at kind of the pace of a tank engine, right? And I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying that, but no, I'm just teasing. And we're a speedboat, we're a new 3-year-old nonprofit that's like trying to drive an invention education movement, but the sheer fact that they wanted to be a part of that, part of me thought, okay, well, innovative mice said, this is messy, this doesn't look the way that I thought it was going to look, right? And so I think some of it is being able to be outside of your comfort zone, for starters. From a workplace perspective, my entire team is virtual. So we live on Zoom. I don't know if any of you have ever been on Zoom. We live on video. I have to be really comfortable with casual, if your dogs are barking and delivery people are coming and you're in your pajamas, like, I'd rather that and be able to see you so that we can have a conversation and we can see how one another's reacting. I'm a big believer that conference calls, nobody is paying attention during a conference call, right? You're not able to be engaged. You're trying to do 2 or 3 things at once. So being able to see each other is still really important. Most of us have whiteboards in our home offices, you know, and we paid for the paint. Everybody paint your walls, you know, what are you drawing on your walls today? So I think you just make it work, but I do think that human aspect, whether it's virtual, whether it's in person, and hearing each other's ideas, and just has to be facilitated when you're working in an innovative space. You got to be able to spark creativity and move the tank engine along a little bit, you know. So it's great.
But space matters.
Space matters. It does.
Space
miss
does. Yeah, you do, and space does really matter. And at the Innovation Lab, we were very, very deliberate when we thought about this. And so, you know, if you've not been there, you're welcome. You see Jeff. He does great tours. And so we love folks to come, but that entire space, we built it out very deliberately. When you walk in there, there's not anything that you see that is not there by design. And it's there by design for the purposes of innovation and collaboration. And so, you know, like you said, you know, we don't have people sitting in cubicles. There's lots of collaboration space. As many of the walls as possible are either whiteboard walls or glass walls, and there's markers everywhere, and the expectation is the students can make a mess, and lots of giant garage doors, and you know, every space is convertible in the moment. And we have days where we roll the entire facility 3 or 4 times a day so that it can completely live as a different function. And we have found that, you know, if we're not for that, you know, put the teams in 4 walls and they'll start to crawl the walls. You know, the staff wants to be able to move all over the space all day long in a variety of settings, from formal to informal, and to be able to move, quite frankly, from conversation to conversation, right? So we want to be able to see folks share innovation literally by turning. Like I can be in a space here and engage in a conversation around the next great design of X, Y, or Z, and literally turn in my chair and engage in a conversation that's behind me because I heard something that makes sense, and something from here can now contribute to that. And we can't do that inside of static spaces, right?
So switching gears a little bit, can you each talk about what, for you, some of the challenges are of being a leader of innovation? And again, given the topic of our panel, I want to add to that if you have any thoughts on any specific challenges to being a woman who is a leader of innovation. And whoever wants to start can start.
Well, I'll jump in real quick because I think that you know, as we think about the variety of students and partners that truck through the work that we do, you know, we see a lack of confidence oftentimes in our young female participants. And what we have found is that by not just embedding the opportunity to lead and to explore, but to also collaboratively fail, that we have the ability to really grow people in that space. You know, I think that some of the other pieces to it is also then helping folks recognize that you don't need to be perfect. And I think that as we, especially for women, as you get to the point where you're leading an endeavor or leading a company, we still have that old mindset that we carry with us all the time, right? We hear frequently that, you know, girls will wait on an idea or an invention, right? And I don't want to share it with you until it's really, really perfect or close to perfect. That the components along the way are not something that I'm so willing to just sort of put out there. And it's a structure that carries over. It's definitely ingrained, for example, in K-12. You know, I saw a really fascinating study the other day that was talking about how in high school in particular, you know, girls will work really, really hard. They'll want to earn that A. They're going to work on that paper. They're going to get every letter right. And you'll ask a really, really bright boy the same age, oh, how that go? That was all right. Yeah, I got it done. You know, and so there we carry with us this mindset around perfection. And I think that part of what is really, really critical in this space is not only that we help folks see that they can fail and fail gracefully and fail often and learn from that opportunity, but also help folks to understand, to recognize the things that you're not good at or you're not going to be good at. We can practice things all the time. It doesn't mean that I'm ever going to be great at X, Y, or Z, but recognizing that and then finding in others, your collaborators, the folks that backfill the gap you have.
So I'm going to echo that. So as a leader, sometimes we surround ourselves, especially when you're in a creative or in an innovative space and you're trying to build an innovative team, there's certain personalities that you gravitate to, right? If you're doing a Myers-Briggs, you might gravitate towards an E, an extrovert or somebody who's more feeling and empathetic oriented instead of maybe what they consider like a judging or logical person. And so as a leader, I think it's important to make sure you have a balance on your team. For starters, because you need both. You need both sides of the coin. And part of being innovative is making sure that you're hearing things that you're not comfortable with and that are that you think differently. But sometimes when you're a creative person or you think you're innovative, you think, well, I got to find people that are like that because then they're also creative. So just knowing your own biases, I think, is part of it. When it comes to girls, I actually think there's this really awesome aspect, and I'm not meaning to say boys don't have empathy because they certainly do, but in the K through 8, specifically in like the 3rd through 8th grade space, girls' development when it comes to empathy, kind of hits a peak before they get into their adolescence, and it's just a really awesome space to be able to lean in and try to build their confidence. That they can continue to build STEM skills, other design skills, any other skills, but if you help them determine their why and build their confidence then, I feel like we as leaders have a responsibility, especially women, okay? We have a responsibility for other girls to see reflection in us. And in that very sweet space, they care about how to affect other people. And it could be a design product, right? Designing a product, it could be a process, it could be any types of problems, but so I think there is a responsibility there, and sometimes, not all the times, but when you take that skill set, and I'm going to call it idealistic, right? But when you take that skill set and you put it in the business world, sometimes it's not understood. And as women, we can be looked at, I'm going to call myself this wrong, as being too idealistic, too soft, right? Well, but what is the investment here? And how is that going to come out in the long run? Well, it's just the right thing to do, and it will come out in the long run because you're going to get a more even workforce. You're going to get a workforce that is empathetic in nature and is able to keep its work. But in general, sometimes in the boardroom, you'll bring that empathy or that idealism, and I think that's a challenge as a female leader to be able to show that you're moving the vision forward, and yet we can still have our ideals. And I think men deal with that too, but I think it's specific to women leaders.
I would say one of the challenges I've seen throughout my career at different places I've worked is just comfort with ambiguity. And we used to have we had a few different visual diagrams at IDEA. We used to talk clients through this. Either we'd be in a 2-day workshop and we'd show like the mood meter. Okay, you're gonna feel really excited at the beginning, and then we're gonna be going out and getting inspired, and we're gonna be at this inflection point where we're figuring out what the opportunities are. And then you're gonna feel really uncomfortable. So this afternoon, you're going to have that feeling. But then by tomorrow, when you're prototyping, you're going to come out of it. And then I've seen other companies have similar things where it's like scribble straddle. Here's the front end that's fuzzy, and then you have more of a flat line. When I first joined Chase, there was this internal catchphrase called "Go Mode" that came from one of the CEOs, because I think being a very large company, often people would talk about things more than do them, so that they created this thing, go mode, because we're just gonna like pick some things, we're gonna go do them. But then the result of that is we are not living in that ambiguous space of are we doing the right thing? We're just like taking something and executing it. So I think I experienced this with many clients too, when we would have a project where we started with, okay, what's our hypothesis? Let's go out and get inspired, a lot of empathy-oriented research and exercises, and then trying to make sense of all that we learned. That's when the client would be like, what have you been doing the last 3 weeks? Like, when are we going to see something? And you might send them pictures of some synthesis boards that don't make much sense to them. So whether it's been working with clients that feel that way, or internally trying to get the teams to resist the urge to just go into go mode, and people who are, some of the folks on my team have been very execution-oriented jobs. and put into innovation because there wasn't really a common understanding of what the innovation mindset or process should be. So we have some team members who are very much like, oh, well, they know how to execute for sure, but they're not used to living in that ambiguous space. So that, I think, I love the fact that we're teaching innovation to younger people and getting people more comfortable with that ambiguity and empathy, because that'll just make everyone bring that more to their grown-up selves.
I think it's hard to say no or not right now when you're a leader in innovation. You know, you want to take every idea and be like, well, you know, it's a safe space, but you can't do every idea. You know, so sometimes those feel like a dichotomy, like we can't do it all if we really want to be innovative and do things well. So I do think that's a challenge too, is trying to find the priorities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that space of innovation, you know, teaches us so much to, you know, to say yes, to, you know, dream big, to brainstorm, no bad ideas, and then there are those moments where you want to say, no, let's move on. And so how do you do that in a way that doesn't, you know, defeat the spirit and the, you know, of innovation and morale? Yeah. So I've got plenty more questions, but I'm sure you do as well. So I'm going to turn it over to you all who has questions, and if no one really does, I can always ask some more. But who might have a question? Yeah.
So, just quick background. I'm the oldest brother in my family. I have a younger brother and a younger sister. And with my brother, it's easy for me to tell him, you know, do this to, you know, be successful at school and that. But with my sister, I find myself having trouble with that. So my question is, what are 3 things we can do to empower young women to be our future leaders?
It's a great question. So I'll just repeat the question part just for anyone who couldn't hear it. What are 3 things that we could do to empower young women to be our future leaders?
I would start with experiences. I just leap right in. You know, at the end of the day, one of the things that I see, and I'm reminded of it over and over and over again as we have kids go through programs, that they thrive in the space of opportunity to have an experience. So it's not just exposure, right? So, you know, for folks to grow in confidence, you have to have a very varied and deliberate set of experiences through which you can grow, right? And so try as many things as possible. Encourage kids to participate in camps and programs and sports and activities. It doesn't really matter what it is, but make sure it's of a great variety. You know, I would lead with that we can't undervalue experience.
I would say, and I know this, you probably do this, but make sure she has a voice, and if she doesn't, wait for her to use it. Like, ask lots and lots of questions, and her voice needs to be as loud at the table as everybody else's. And I don't mean for, you know, as loud, like, I want her to be able to express herself and that be given the same weight. And we think we do that, and then often, I'm not saying you do this, but sometimes we try to interpret, ask more questions, and let her find her voice so that she can speak for herself if she's not dealing with confrontation on her own, good or bad, let her deal with confrontation on her own. If she's in a school setting and there's an issue, don't tell her how to handle it, coach her through how to handle it, let her handle it on her own. Like, give her a voice, because that will give her confidence, right, that she has the ability to set her own path. So I would definitely say give her a voice and listen when she has it, that her ideas are probably very different than yours or your brother's, and give that weight.
I would say don't necessarily treat her differently. Like, everyone's a person. Like, the fact that she's female doesn't mean, like, if you any type of encouragement or support or advice you give to your brother, the same thing could apply to her. And something you said earlier resonated with me about I think both of you alluded to this, like this perfectionist tendency. And I certainly experienced that, where I felt like I had to get a perfect score, and even now I sort of carry that. And I realized, you know, I was reading like this, so cliche, the Steve Jobs biography, and it's like, you know, he didn't like play by the rules. Like, you can be successful without like ticking every box and making sure you're perfect. So encouraging people to be their authentic selves, and that you're great the way you are, and you don't have to have a perfect score, straight A's to be successful. That having a point of view is also important, like not just going with the flow, and broad experience. So I would just sort of echo all those things.
I'm gonna add one more. I am raising a boy. I have one kid. He's just about to be 11, and the other day we were driving a group of boys to his birthday party, and I hear him in the back talking to one of his friends who made some kind of just generalization about something boys like or boys do, and my son says, "Well, that's awfully sexist," and I just cracked up, and I thought it was so great. And so which leads me to my point, which is, while I definitely don't think that leadership space is for women is something that is up to men to allow them. I think it's for women to take. On the other hand, I think that it's important that we also teach young men to respect women and see them as leaders, and not have it be something that seems like an anomaly. So I would just say that as we think about how we grow our young women to be future leaders, it's also about growing our young men to see women as future leaders. Yeah.
Okay, I actually have two questions. So the first one is kind of off of what you just said. So as like a woman in design, I mean, a lot of it is dominated by men, and it's filmed in everything is really pretty dominated by men. How do you gain respect being a woman? I'm in the design industry, and sometimes I notice when I work with men, not often, but it's happened a lot, that they devalue my opinion, or they're kind of underlying condescending because I'm a woman. So how do you guys deal with that?
So how do you gain respect? How do you build your own sort of respect within your peers and your team in a male-dominated field?
I just try not to focus on it. I mean, when I was in industrial design school at Pratt, there were very few women. Maybe this is going back to that perfectionist tendency. I worked really hard, made sure I got an internship at a great company, and that company, it was mostly men industrial designers. I think there were 2 women, and often I got put on like the low-tech housewares project. I didn't get to put on the sexy consumer electronics projects, but I didn't let that bother me, because I actually found that I enjoyed that work more, and then I just worked really hard at doing a great job wherever I was. So there was a project early in my career where it was me right out of school, plus one of the most senior male designers in the agency at the time. And the project was with Estee Lauder to redesign what they called the corporate pump. So they had some off-the-shelf pump that many other companies had, and they wanted one that was just for them. So I was put on the 2 of us were on this team. So I was sketching and doing my thing, and he's doing his thing, and he's very cocky. Like of course they're gonna pick mine, because I'm me, and she's this young graduate. Well, they picked my idea, and then he was the one who had to do the CAD for it, which just killed him. But I stuck around, and I was at that firm for a while, and I think just me being myself and having my successes made people respect me. It wasn't that I had to draw attention to the fact that I was a woman. Like, just trying to roll with the punches. We were talking earlier today even about back then, 20 years ago, there could be a lot of blue humor at lunch, and I didn't really like it, but I just sort of, again, rolled with it, because in that era, that's just what you did. And I think not being overly sensitive or wanting to be exceptional or treated differently made them respect me more. So I'm just like anyone else. I don't need to be treated differently.
Yeah, I think that being professional is one of the keys. When I first started my career, I was one of only 10 women in the world with a degree in what I was doing. And so I can't tell you how many field projects I went on where it was me and 15 men or whatever, right? For months on end. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about me, I learned a lot about them, I learned a lot of things I didn't want to know. But at the end of the day, let's be real, but at the end of the day, the thing that I think that got me through that and the benefit that I found even in that experience, and it has held true as I've changed my career multiple times along the way, because I have, that just being just the consummate professional in that space and in the face of that, and it's not always easy, don't get me wrong, so please don't take that the wrong way. It's sometimes, and some days it's really, really hard. And I think that the other piece to it is sort of to step back and try to understand why is it happening? You know, what's the behavior? What's the cultural norm, quite frankly, that's driving why that's taking place? And then being able, quite frankly, to design your way around it.
Okay, so only about 10, 12 years ago, I was the youngest female director that was promoted at the media company that I was working at. And there was only 3 women directors out of 28, and the ones that were, the other directors did not have a good reputation amongst men. They were looked at as too aggressive and too abrasive, and so I went in kind of, guns a-blazing, like, you're gonna hear me. And what I would tell you, what I learned from that was that my work spoke for itself. I didn't need to be the megaphone all the time. Not to say that you shouldn't if you feel like you need your own internal PR, but in general, your work will stand alone. So men and women, go in, do your very best work. When you mess up, be accountable for it, right? When you're having personal issues, be as gracious and professional as you can, and be authentic. And I'm still learning this one, so I'm learning on all these, but, and don't apologize for who you are. You are gonna bring different gifts to the table. Some of that will be inherently because you're a woman, and some of it will be just because you're you. And also recognize that your other colleagues, male and female, they bring other ones to the table as well. And sometimes that's really hard to see, especially when there's personality conflicts as well. The other thing I would tell you to do is to find your person. Specifically, if you can find a female role model that you like the type of leadership that she offers, or you feel like you can mentor underneath, that you can kind of gut check yourself against, that you can go in and say, listen, is this about me because I'm a woman, or is this because, sometimes it is a personality thing, or it is just, perception. So definitely the professionalism, but your work will stand alone, so just do good work, and people will start to notice, and to the extent of the people that don't, just don't let them monopolize your time and distract it, because it's not worth it.
And you had a second question?
Oh, yeah. You guys kind of talked about this at the end. How do you deal with prioritizing?
So how do you prioritize in your busy lives and your busy work?
Do you mean prioritize at work or prioritize life?
Well, no, at work. So if you guys are, especially when it comes to like design and innovation, you have so many ideas. Sometimes you deal with clients, you have projects, so there are deadlines, but there is a creative brainstorming process that goes along. So how do you deal with that time frame of prioritizing, but then also still getting it done?
Yeah, I'm in the thick of that now, because I think one thing that's different about my current job than my past life, we did innovation work, but we'd have a client coming to us with a challenge and a budget. So we would be able to scope, okay, for how much they have, we can do this much work with this size team, and this is what we can accomplish to meet. So they've already identified there's a business need, and they've made the case internally, hey, we need X amount of money to address this business issue. Within Chase, the Innovation Lab has always been autonomous, so it's kind of up to me now to decide what we spend our time on. And it better have business impact, like that sort of goes without saying in our organization. So what I did was set up these roundtable conversations with all the different stakeholders we could work with and gather from them, what do you think the biggest issues are that we can help tackle? Then synthesize that and played it back to them. And now I'm in the process of hearing them, repeating to them what I heard broadly, and then getting their input on what they think the priorities are, and that'll help me make the list that I need to go back to my boss with. So it's definitely more of an art than a science. I don't think there's not a textbook way to do it. You kind of have to use your instinct and balance that with, okay, this is logic and this is instinct, and it's not one or the other, but a combination.
Yeah, this is like always evolving. I would say that the first thing you need to do is prioritize things that no one else really can do but you, right? So, and sometimes we think that's a different amount than it is, but you know, if no one else really can do that particular work, whether it be brainstorming or whether it be, you know, things that you need to be part of as a collaborative group, so put that on your calendar first and try to plan that further out. Then if there's anybody that needs you, like it reports to you, you know, you have a responsibility to make sure that you're available to them, so you put that on next, right? And then, you know, sometimes what we do is we schedule first, like the things we need to execute on, because it feels really, really good to check the boxes, but then you fill that in. You know, so for example, if you have family obligations, or that, you know, you put that on first. You know, I've got to be out by these days at 5 o'clock because that's, nobody else can do that but you, right? So you put that first, and what will slowly happen is you'll realize where your margin is and what things have to be delegated out, and double check it. You know, if you have a mentor or you have somebody and you start feeling overwhelmed, it usually means you need some type of reorganization. You know, so if it starts to feel like there's too much, and I'm giving you advice that I'm trying to take myself all the time, you're probably not prioritizing correctly. So reevaluate it and get feedback, right? Iterate on that. Why isn't this working? And do that regularly.
I would say set limits, first and foremost, set limits, right? You know, so I'll step back from the day-to-day, how do you organize? You've had, you know, great insight on that, but I very early on, and my staff, I could see them roll their eyes at me all the time. You know, I go out in the world, I have these conversations, and we have these meetings. I meet these amazing people, and I come back and say, hey, you know, we can do X, Y, or Z. And they're like, oh my God, somebody just close her into a room and make her stop. Because at the end of the day, you know, the execution on that, but I will tell you that one of the things I tell the staff all the time is you need to figure out where and how to set some limits, right? So just, you know, a couple of examples. You can't leave a voicemail for me. I decided a long time ago that voicemail was evil. It sucks so much time, and quite frankly, it was not very productive, right? Especially when people would call and they would just go on and on and on and on, and wait till they got to the very end to tell you why they were really calling. And the reality is, you know, at one point I started calculating how much time I spent listening to other people on a recording telling me something I needed to know in a given week, and I said, that's it. So you call our office, I'm not in the phone tree, you cannot leave me a voicemail. So, you know, that's just one example of setting limits. You know, one of the other ones that I adopted a long time ago, back when I was in grad school, because it could be so overwhelming trying to, you know, recognize I've got all this stuff on my plate, I have to do all of these things, and for me it was just creating some personal space to then when I actually did work on those things that I was very dedicated to that. So, you know, for example, I don't read any email after 5 o'clock. Even if I'm still at the office, I'm not gonna read it. And I'm not gonna read it again until 9 o'clock the next morning. I'm not gonna do it on the weekend. I made a choice to prioritize my time so that my time when I spent it doing work was insanely valuable. And I tell my staff, now nobody listens to me, but I do tell them, Jim is shaking his head, you know, stop, go home. You know, quit doing X, Y, or Z because that's not as important as something else might be. And come back tomorrow really fresh to do that, and it's more productive.
These were great. I've learned something tonight, which is all anyone can ask in a day.
Turn your voicemail off.
I know. I rarely get a voicemail because no one can find my number, which is awesome. I love it because I too hate voicemails. But yeah, I learned a number of things, which is wonderful. I feel like part of prioritizing your time is recognizing the value of your time, and I think that's what's really critical. Is that I know that sometimes, especially for new professionals, you know, you might sit there and do the math in your head of, well, what's my hourly wage, and therefore how valuable is my time really? But your time has more value than just your wage, and so I think to me that's a great note to end on, because again, bringing this back to the overarching theme of women in design. I think part of it is learning to value ourselves and our time, and how that factors into our leadership development and prioritizing and everything from soup to nuts. So I know that there are more questions, but we've got some more snacks out there, and so we'll be around. You can ask more questions of these individuals. We have some really awesome, really cool items out there that have been donated by some great supporters, and there's still time to buy a raffle ticket if you haven't, and in about 15, 20 minutes I think we'll do the drawing. And so I want to just once again thank you all for coming, and I want to thank Carly and Annalise and Veronica for joining us tonight, and I hope you too learned something today. Thank you.